the Tillamook County Budget Committee meeting. Today is May 10th, 2023. It's 3 o'clock p.m. and we have 6 members of the committee, and I'm going to talk about it.
Can
anybody hear us, and are we on?
No. Closer to
Yep. Yeah, hear you fine.
Okay. So what we're going to do is follow the agenda, and we do have published agenda, and I believe there's some in the back area as well. But before we get to our first item, I'm going to offer a couple of remarks and observations and things about how we go through this today, because unlike previous hearings over the past few years, we have some people here today who are very interested in at least part of our agenda. So we want to allow plenty of time for that. But I also want to explain what the county does, how it does it, and who all of us are. So I'm going to start with that part. And by the way, there are of the 4 of us that you see, there are 2 more online, and I believe they're probably on all the screens everywhere. One is a county commissioner, David Yamamoto. Many of you know Commissioner Yamamoto. He's in his 2nd term, unable to be here today. And then former Commissioner Bill Bartlein. So I want to talk about the 3 of us who are the appointed lay people. You have 3 commissioners that you have voted for. 2 of them are in their 2nd term. 1 of them is in the 1st term. But the 3 of us, I'm going to tell you who we are. First, Bill Bartlein. You see him on the line. He's been a former county commissioner for a couple of terms. He's also sits on the Port of Tillamook Bay. He's a graduate of Oregon State, and he's also a certified public accountant. So he knows numbers as well as anybody in this room, and been doing the budgets for a long time. Next to me is Mike Scott, who has been in the finance industry. He's a graduate of Portland State University. He's a former mayor of Manzanita, a couple of terms, I think 6 years, he told me. He lives in Manzanita, so he's been in the financial industry and knows a lot about accounting and numbers. So that's the 2nd one. And I'm the 3rd. My name is Doug Olson. I live in Pacific City. I've been down there about 30 years. I'm a native Oregonian. I've been elected to public office 7 times to our local water and sewer, and 4 times on the PUD board. I owned our own business along with my wife in Pacific City for 23 years. I've worked for large corporations and also had administrative positions in Washington County, and I'm the current president of Statewide Public Power Group. So the reason I say that is, you know your commissioners, you may not know us, you may not know our background, but what you have are 3 individuals who have a long history of budget work and backgrounds. We're educated. We think we know what we're talking about when we ask questions, and so we, along with the other 3 commissioners, constitute your budget committee. The 3 of us.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, there must be a mic on somewhere. Someone is shuffling a lot of papers and things and creating a lot of background noise.
Well, that might
all the other
be me.
microphones are off.
Might be me, Commissioner. I'll try not to shuffle my papers.
No, I don't think it's you. But thank you.
Okay. All right, well, I'll continue on. The 3 of us who are appointed also serve as a compensation board. And what that means is we are the ones who deliver recommendations to the county commission for the salaries of elected officials. And there are several in Tillamook County. And later on in the agenda, and in a few minutes, we'll report out of our meeting that we had this morning and talk about some recommendations relative to their salaries and how the county might proceed through the budget process, looking at that. So here's the budget process itself. Tillamook County is a statutory county under Oregon law, meaning it's not home rule. And that's important because a home rule county, like 2 of our neighboring, Washington County and Clatsop County, employ a county manager, and then they have commissioners who serve as policy individuals. In the case of Washington, not Washington County or Clatsop, in the case of Tillamook County, the 3 commissioners are elected, but they also serve as administrators as well as a policy board. And that's why they're more deeply involved. And that's important to remember when we talk about the budget and numbers, is they're not just setting policy, they're actually hands-on with all the various departments. So another thing that you should understand, and some of you may know all this, but for those who don't, I'll take just a moment. The budget at Tillamook County, like nearly every budget across Oregon and perhaps most of America, is composed of several kinds of funds, and principally two. There's special funds, and then there's a general fund. And we'll be talking about all those today. The examples of a special fund include a number of things that you might think that over which the county has a lot of control, but it really doesn't. For example, well, it does have control, but it can't go from one to another, and I'll explain why. For example, our Parks Department is a special fund. It gets no money from the general fund whatsoever. It does all its service delivery by virtue of the fees that it charges and perhaps some grants and so on. That's the same with the library. The library has a serial levy, a 5-year levy. It generates its own money and funds itself and is not connected meaningfully to the general fund. Health Department, the same thing, and our beloved county fair is the same thing. They get no general fund monies, or a very small amount if they do. So then you get to the general fund, and that's where we'll have most of the conversation today. That's where this committee and ultimately the county commission has quite a bit of discretion. They can decide where the money goes after it gets here, and they can move money around under certain conditions and so on. So that's where the discretionary money happens. And the groups in that, there are several, and some of the mandated county services like elections, the general administration, the county treasurer, property record, support services, human resources, and also the sheriff. And I know many of you are here today to hear about the sheriff's budget, and we'll spend considerable time on that in a few minutes. So that's the distinction. We won't talk a lot about the special funds because they're nearly all in balance, and they're in balance most of the time. They get dedicated monies. For example, money that comes to the health department typically can only be used for certain things related to the health services. And anything else they can't. For example, if the commissioners wanted something for the courthouse, they typically would not come from the health department because those are dedicated funds. So that's important to know when we talk about those particular funds. So final thing, here's the process. There's two general meetings of this committee, but it's really a 4-step process. The first one starts early in the fiscal year, and the fiscal year of Tillamook County is July 1. Some organizations use the calendar year. The federal government's fiscal year begins October 1, but for Tillamook County, and I think all the counties in Oregon and most of the cities, it's July 1. So this budget we're talking about today is July 1 of this year through June 30 of 2024. So the way it works is our treasurer, who is over here, requests information from all the departments, and there are several dozen departments, to come to her by a certain date, and then she puts that in a form that we all get, and it's called the requested budget. And that's where each department head, often working with our commissioners, will say, okay, here's what we need to keep things going the way they are, or here's what we need to replace, or here's what needs to happen next year, or we'd like to do this, could we expand to this, or what do we do? And they come to an agreement, and they present a requested budget. That comes to us in the middle of April, to this entire committee. And we look at that, and that budget is out of balance because you have a certain amount of revenue that's projected by the treasurer from a variety of sources, and then the requests go against that. And in the number of years I've been doing this, they never balance. People always ask for a lot of things, and they don't always get what they ask for, which is perfectly normal. So that goes on for 2.5 days. Every department comes here to the county courthouse and makes a presentation. And some of them only take 10 or 15 minutes. The more complex ones may take an hour and a half or more. And they'll talk about their staffing, their need for vehicles, their need for computers, and so on, all of that. And we go through that in considerable detail and ask a lot of questions. So when they get done, then the budget committee talks about this and says, okay, we're out of balance by a certain amount of money. It so happens the general fund this year is out of balance by about 1.8 million. And that's out of a $30 million budget, give or take. And that's not unusual, there have been worse years. So then what happens, it goes back to the county treasurer, and she makes some recommended changes and cuts, talks to staff and so on, and comes back to us, which is where we are today, with a proposed budget which is balanced. And that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at a balanced budget now, but we can change that if we need to. Then, at the end of today, if all goes well and we come to an understanding and agreement on everything, then it becomes the approved budget by this committee, and it goes back to the treasurer. Then the final step, in the middle of June, there's a meeting of the county commission. They meet every week typically, and that same budget comes back to them and they adopt it. But they can make changes. The 3 elected commissioners can make changes not to exceed 10%. At that time. If it exceeds 10%, for whatever reason, there's been an unusual circumstance, or revenue that we thought was coming is not coming, then they need to reconvene this committee if it exceeds 10%. So we're in the middle of the process. So I want to make it absolutely clear that there's been no firm decisions on anything. There's been no action by this committee to adopt a balanced budget, and certainly not the county commission. And that's why you're all here today, is to tell us what we need to do or change or consider. And so that's my I guess lesson in budgeting. And I know for some of you, you know that extremely well. But perhaps that makes it a little clearer to understand what it is we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And by the way, virtually every county and city in Oregon does this pretty much the same way. So with that. The next item is our annual budget message from Sean Blanchard, who is the elected county treasurer. She's also the budget officer, and she's also, I guess, what you would say is a finance manager, as most every organization of any size has. So she's going to read into the record an annual budget message, and it's several pages long. And then when she's done, what I'm going to do is ask the committee to ask questions of her to clarify something she said, and then when that's done and we all maybe get our questions answered, or even if we don't, then we're going to hear from county departments. So then we'll call on anybody, and I'll start with the special funds, since they typically are fairly straightforward and balanced, as I said. So if someone wants to come up and offer a recommendation or comments or questions to the committee from special funds, we'll do that. Then we'll go to the general fund. And that would be the same thing, the directors of those departments can talk about that. Then when that's done, then we're going to hear from any of you who want to say something on the record to this committee relative to any budget, any part you want. And we'll take that under consideration. And I will have some suggestions when we get to that point on timing and how we may not ask people to repeat what the person before him said and so on. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our county treasurer, who's going to read into the record her annual budget message. And listen carefully, please, because there's a lot of information there. And she spent a lot of time on this, and she happens to know what she's talking about. And by the way, the scope of the budget is around $140 million, and that's for Little Tillamook County. That's quite a bit of money. There's about 30 plus in the general fund and another 100 million in special funds, like I said earlier, parks and the fairgrounds and all the others. So there's considerable amount of money that passes through the hands of these people in this room. And that does not include money that goes to special districts, like school districts and water and sewer districts and so on, that also passes through the treasurer. So she's got a big job. So with that, I'll ask our county treasurer to kindly read into the record your message.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Welcome and thank you, members of the Budget Committee, Board of County Commissioners, and Tillamook County citizens for joining us today for this especially important process. As budget officer, I present a budget message I think different from any given before. This address will begin with the budget basics, including the purpose, structure, and key accounting principles, followed by a high-level summary of the total budget and significant changes before going through an in-depth review of the general fund. The Budget Committee has been noticed as required by ORS 294-31135. The Budget Committee reviews the proposed budget and receives the budget message. Following budget approval by the Budget Committee, another public hearing is held. A budget summary and notice of hearing are published prior to the hearing, subject to strict legal requirements as to the time and method of publication. The Board of County Commissioners is scheduled to adopt the county budget at a public hearing on June 21st, 2023 at 10:35 a.m. After hearing testimony, the Commissioners may adjust the budget within certain parameters or adopt the approved budget presented to them by the Budget Committee. Budget purpose, structure, and key accounting principles. The budget is a policy document which establishes the operational plan for delivering programs and services to county residents. With the adoption of the budget, the Board of County Commissioners establishes the funding authority for the upcoming year and strategic direction into the future. As a public organization, the budget must additionally strike a balance between meeting current operational needs of the organization and the public as a whole, and ensuring that immediate needs are not funded at the detriment of future needs. In this task, the Budget Committee members must carefully weigh the funding decisions of this fiscal year with the needs required of future fiscal years. The presented budget includes 4 types of funds. General fund, which is the county's main operating fund and is appropriated at various departmental levels. Special revenue funds. There are currently 45 dedicated and other funds that are budgeted separately from the general fund and cannot be used for general purposes. The dedicated and other funds comprise $98,111,820, or 78% of the total budget, and ranged from a $17.7 million Health and Human Services Fund to a $28,500 Juvenile Trust Fund. Debt service funds. The county currently has 2 debt service funds. Library debt service funded the construction of the main library at Stillwell and 3rd, and the road debt service that funds road repairs, culvert replacements, and bridge maintenance. Capital funds. 6 funds intended for the funding of large capital and infrastructure projects. These funds encompass the long-term projects of broadband, radio, building improvements, road construction grant, and courthouse annex. These are projects that require multi-year funding due to the scale and cost of the infrastructure and maintenance involved. Expenditures are appropriated by categories. Personal services. This is the county's workforce costs, including salaries, income tax, benefits, uniform, and incentives. Materials and services. These are goods and services ranging from office supplies, utilities, fuel, to building and ground repair and maintenance. Capital outlay, which are purchases and projects with a useful life expectancy greater than 1 year and a cost over $5,000. Operating transfers. These are transfers between county funds. These include a required public health contribution and several multi-year capital asset or large cost items and projects that might otherwise require the additional incursion of debt, such as vehicle reserve, which purchases all general fund county vehicles, a computer reserve, which is for general fund replacement, computers in the future, servers, technology, and the building and improvement, which encompasses large-scale projects for maintaining and continuing the viable use of county facilities and grounds. There is a contingency, which funds are held in reserve that can be accessed with budget amendments. Contingency funds are used as a buffer for appropriated expense amounts and the ability to exceed the appropriated amount if the need arises. Unappropriated ending fund balance. These are funds that are restricted from use in the current fiscal year to maintain sufficient fund balance for the following fiscal year operations prior to major revenue receipts. Tillamook County uses a cash basis of accounting for all budgets. Revenues are recorded at the time they are received and expenditures are accounted for when paid. Budget summary. The total Tillamook County budget for fiscal year 2023-2024 is $145,640,590, with $1.6 million still out of balance, and that is in the TLT Facilities Fund 121. The adopted budget for fiscal year 2022-2023 currently totals $133,022,850. There's a chart showing the comparison for reference. Significant increases in total revenue include the Health Department operating fees, Medicaid self-pay fees, and insurance fees increased to combined $2.39 million. The Health Department is also budgeting an increase of $1.6 million in their beginning fund balance. The Library Department fund balance reflects an increase of $1.17 million. Mitigation Grant Fund is budgeting $4.5 million in new federal and state grants. And radio and broadband capital funds combined are budgeting an additional $5 million in federal grant funding. Significant increases in total expenditures. For all increased budgeted federal and state grants revenues listed above, offsetting expenditures have been budgeted in equal amounts, totaling an additional $9.5 million in expenses. Transfers out are increased due to a budgeted $5.18 million transfer between TLT Facilities and PC Woods Parking Management for the implementation of Phase 1 of the Cape Coanda Parking Lot project. In summary, with all funds considered, Tillamook County's special revenue and capital project funds are making great strides in multi-year infrastructure and capital projects, as well as with growing programs and enhancing public services. General fund considerations. Tillamook County's focus in all budget processes is to continue to serve the community to our utmost given the fiscal opportunities available. This year's budget preparation added a close look into fund sustainability given current and forward-looking economic factors. During the budget preparation process, the general fund ran into several issues in multi-year forecasting, raising concerns for the current rate at which reserve balances are playing a critical role in maintaining service levels. The following addresses the general fund only and details each key factor that has been identified as having a potential to heavily influence the rates at which operating losses are incurred and reserve balances are used up. Key factors considered in sustainability review include timber revenue volatility and the Western Oregon State Habitat Conservation Plan, budget versus actual performance, operating ratios, which is current year expenses over current year revenue, staffing level, and inflation and other cost escalation factors. Timber revenue volatility and the Western Oregon State Forest Habitat Conservation Plan and Tillamook County's response. This current fiscal year, history repeated itself in a way that prompted a new line of thinking in the general fund budget preparation process. Anyone who has any memory of county operations in the last 8 to 15 years knows we have grappled with timber revenue shortfalls on numerous occasions. In the beginning of Q4 of this fiscal year, timber revenue received was $1.2 million under the budgeted amount. At the same time, recruitment for vacant positions was on an uptick and turnover rates were at a record low of 1% for the general fund. Q3 timber revenue had come in at $600,000 when you're budgeted for 4.1. This is a disheartening quarterly amount, and all indications were leading towards Q4 timber distribution being less than stellar. As many of the department heads are survivors of prior timber shortfall cycles, they got to work closely reviewing their budgets. The outcome, though improved, still left an out-of-balance request. This presented an opportunity to do a deep dive into the true historical performance of the Tillamook County budget, starting with just how much the general fund relies on timber. Timber is a substantial portion of the general fund's annual operating revenues. A breakdown of major revenues with their trends are below. 43% in property tax revenue, which is revenue generated from the Tillamook County permanent tax rate, is budgeted at $8.6 million for fiscal year 23-24. Due to tax law, this stream is limited to 3% growth per year, with property development allowing for small additional gains, and the current annual growth trend is 4%. 22.5% state timber revenue. These revenues are generated from the timber grown and harvested by the Oregon Department of Forestry and are heavily influenced by economic factors. We are budgeting 4.5 in the general fund for 23-24. 7.6% is state and federal grant funding, and this is restricted use revenue received for funding certain programs. 11.9% is from fees and fine revenue, which is produced from general county departmental operations. 2.3% is other, which is mostly one-time funding, and 12.7% is transfers in and intercounty reimbursements, which is predominantly indirect cost allocation transferred from special revenue funds that utilize general fund central service departments such as HRIS, Treasurer's Office, BOC, and facilities. Other transfers include interdepartmental work and reimbursements. In summary, 1/5 to 1/4 of the revenue the Tillamook County General Fund relies on annually is unstable, and the other major revenue stream, property taxes, are limited to a growth rate below current PCI inflation rates. For at least the last 15 years, the county has ridden the roller coaster of timber revenue by using year-to-year forecasts generated by the Oregon Department of Forestry as dictating a quarter of our budget. When the forecasts are up, we grow. When they are down, we hold our breaths and cut as far as the timber shortfall commands. Exhibit B below illustrates the reactionary response the county has faced with timber revenue and the economic cycle downturns. Note that with every year the timber did not meet budgeted amounts or fell below 4 million, FTE were reduced. That was in fiscal year 9, 10, 11, and 15. You can see the orange line is the budgeted, the green is, no, sorry, the green is the budgeted chart. The actual is the orange. Average, I can't change my stuff.
So in this graph, we see that there's an overlay of the orange line being the FTE that the general fund was able to support for the last 15 years, and then to response to the revenue that is the blue bars, and versus the budgeted timber revenue in the green line.
For the 2023-2024 budget and future budgets, the looming question of what the HCP plan will do to timber revenue down the road turn the timber conversation to how do we neutralize the effect of the timber revenue cycles and what can the general fund really sustain? Taking a page from our neighbors to the north who budget timber revenues annually based on the lowest amount received in the last 15 years, the question turned to if we budget annual timber revenue at an average rate, what can we really afford? Using average timber revenue rather than annual guesstimates serves two purposes. It would, one, allow us to neutralize the timber volatility, and two, enable us to save anything above the average when revenue is high and have those same savings in a stabilization fund when revenue is low. Annual timber revenue has averaged $4.5 million over the past 10 years. This number requires ongoing annual review as the bubble years of 2019-2020 are included, and HCP, the Oregon Department of Forestry's plan for habitat conservation and consequent timber harvest restrictions will likely impact the number as we move forward. Take note of how close the average of 4.5 million is to the number at which we have previously had to make reductions 4 million. General fund operating performance, staffing inflation, and sustainability. The general fund has been budgeting operating deficits over $3.7 million for the last 4 fiscal years. Fiscal year 23-24 budget has a projected beginning fund balance of 11.5. If we then take into account the required offset of 6.5 million, the county must carry forward, which is the unappropriated ending fund balance needed to continue operations from July through October before major property tax revenues are received. Exhibit C shows that once the 6.5 is protected, this leaves a remainder of 5 million in reserve, or enough to cover operating deficits as budgeted for just 1 year. During a time of tough recruitment response and quickly changing economic needs, budgeting expense appropriations at high levels of available resources allowed for departments to be adapted in tough markets. But with the changing tide of recruitment successes, increased FTE or full-time equivalent, and all cards already laid out on the table, we find ourselves in a position in which close monitoring of departmental growth is necessary to project immediate and long-term funding issues. The D shows 5 years of operating income or losses as budgeted and actual amounts. Exhibit E shows the FTE that corresponds with the fiscal year operating performance. As you can see from the actual, losses have occurred in the past 2 years. Exhibits D and E, the last 2 slides you just saw, work together to show us the picture of why budgets of greater than 3.7 million operating deficits have worked thus far. It is the actual financials being at huge variance with budgeted amounts, largely due to staffing vacancies and unused expenditures. The crux is included in Exhibit E, which portrays the recent uptick in recruitment successes, reflecting an 8-year high average FTE of 118 in fiscal year 2022-2023. To date, with the current FTE of 121, soon to be 123, including upcoming June hires. The recent increase in FTE and low turnover rates have increased actual annual expenditure amounts, moving the general fund closer to the budgeted FTE costs and therefore closer to the budgeted operating deficits. Economic inflation rates affecting the cost of materials and services, as well as capital outlay projects, have worked to close the gap of the variances in budgeted versus actual performance even further. Fiscal year 2022-2023 is expected to end in an operating deficit. Considerations for halting the avoidable internal transfers are underway. A history of how closely the general fund has ridden the line of sustainability, and the outcomes are included in Exhibit F. Reflect on the fiscal years 2011 through 2014 and the slow run-up to a lack of sufficient reserve fund balance and the ultimate reductions occurring in fiscal year 16. The aftermath of which was the slow growth period through 2018 when the timber revenue hit record numbers. Note how we are currently mirroring the run-up to unsustainable numbers, but a much higher deficit rate budgeted. The good news is that we are 1 year ahead of where we were in 2015. The processes outlined below are meant as a red flag warning to prevent history from repeating itself. In response to the concerns regarding sustainability of the general fund with its increased actual staffing levels, increased costs for goods and services, and the need to be able to closely monitor further departmental growth, a systematic review of budgeted versus actual expenditure utilization was performed. $388,900 of materials and service line items were reduced. In addition to the reductions, an average total of $1.5 million dispersed among nearly all general fund departments was located as having been unused in specific line items for at least 5 consecutive fiscal years. Below are the amounts that are identified and transferred to the contingency fund. The identified unused line items, if appropriated for use in the current budget and used without oversight, might unknowingly bring the general fund to unsustainable levels as soon as the 2024-2025 fiscal year. To avoid the unconscious commitment of potentially unstable funds, $1.5 million was moved from departmental budgets to the non-departmental contingency. The goal of this modification is to create a system requiring more public awareness of the request of these funds, and could then facilitate getting all parties critically thinking on the short or long-term need of additional revenue streams to support the additional expenditures. The ability to measure the county's operating growth and make it visible to all, I believe, will serve all parties well as the county faces the tough decisions that are prompted by revenue limitations in the future. To address the community conversations regarding the Sheriff's Office deputy position, or the $900,000 or 6 FTE of the $1.5 million moved into the contingency fund, the intention was never to eliminate the positions, but to get all vested parties aware of the additional operating deficit this would add to annual operations and the need for a long-term funding solution. The public's outpouring of deputy support is not lost on this conversation. This budget exercise has performed its purpose in getting the Board of County Commissioners, the departments, and the general public's attention. No matter the outcome and decisions made within this meeting, I hope this budget proposal has made what was previously invisible visible. Beyond that, I hope it
John, I
gets us.
apologize, but you on the board of
What?
Sorry, what?
Can you say something, John? Who's back?
Can you hear me, David?
Yeah, now we can hear you
Okay,
again. You
just
cut off for
shut
about a
off.
minute there.
It's not how it's supposed to work.
I'll just start top of the page. They had identified unused line items, if appropriated for use in the current budget and used without oversight, might unknowingly bring the general fund to unstable levels as soon as the 2024-2025 fiscal year. To avoid the unconscious commitment of potentially unstable funds, $1.5 million was moved from departmental budgets to the non-departmental contingency. The goal of this modification is to create a system requiring more public awareness of the request of these funds, and could then facilitate getting all parties critically thinking on the short or long-term need of additional revenue streams to support the additional expenditures. The ability to measure the county's operating growth and make it visible to all, I believe, will serve all parties well as the county faces the tough decisions that are prompted by revenue limitations in the future. To address the community conversation regarding the Sheriff's Office deputy positions, the $900,000 or 6 FTE of the $1.5 million moved into the contingency fund, the intention was never to eliminate the positions, but to get all vested parties aware of the additional operating deficit this would add to annual operations and the need for a long-term funding solution. The public's outpouring of deputy support is not lost on this conversation. This budget exercise has performed its purpose in getting the Board of County Commissioners, the departments, and the general public's attention. No matter the outcome and decisions made within this meeting, I hope that this budget proposal has made what was previously invisible visible. Beyond that, I hope it gets us all thinking about not only this year, but next. I leave you all with the request that with any suggestions or decisions made today, pause and think, what about next year? If the decisions made today do not work at this time next year, let us all start the conversations now on how to solve that problem before we come together again. Respectfully submitted, Sean Blanchard, County Treasurer, Budget Officer.
Thank you, Sean. That has been read into the record and so noted, so now, I'm gonna ask all six of us if there's any of you who would care to comment or ask questions regarding the message that we just heard. Including our colleagues online, Commissioner Yamamoto and Ms. Carlisle.
Sorry, Doug, you want me to start?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. So, yeah, let me address the timber revenue, just very briefly, although you've heard me talk about this before. We are under the gun from the Department of Forestry. The most recent IP implementation plan that came out from the Department of Forestry, which was approved, and that takes effect July 1, that's timber harvest anywhere from 24 to 32% on an annual basis. That is a fiscal cliff coming towards Tillamook County and all the trust counties, but especially impacting Tillamook County, Clatsop County, and Washington County. So we need to be extremely careful there. And this is what I told the Lee County School Board just 3 weeks ago. This next year might be okay. But don't let that fool you. You need to plan not for next year, but you need to plan for 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, as this implementation plan and this habitat conservation plan take effect. So even though there might not be extreme pain early on, we need to be careful moving forward. And unless we get the Board of Forestry to do something here, which they have been unwilling to do over the past several years, as I have been chair of the Council of Forest Trustland Counties, all the trust counties are going to be in some fiscal pain. So I think that's the main message we have coming out of this. And so I do agree with, and Sean, I will tell you, this is the best budget message I have heard from any treasurer in my years here at the county. You've really gone into some detail here explaining how we need to be looking forward. That, I think, is the key message to me. We need to be looking forward. The last thing we want to do in this county is to have layoffs. And unfortunately, if we get to the point where we're hiring a bunch of people, and then 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we hit this budget cliff that may be coming with timber revenue, I think we're going to be in that kind of a situation. So again, same thing I told the Dane County School District, a cautionary tale when it comes to budgeting timber revenue moving forward. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else care to comment at this point, and we'll have ample time as we move along on Sean's message.
So Sean, this is Bill. In looking at this, the actual FTE, so last year, based on my recommendation, we budgeted for 54 people, and it looks like only 41 have been able to be hired. Is that correct? Okay. As the chart said, 41.31 that were actual average, and the amount budgeted was 54.25.
Correct.
And it was basically the same thing the year before, 41 people employed and 53 budgeted for.
Correct.
So we've been over budgeting, knowing full well that the sheriff wasn't going to be able to hire those many people in the past, and just kind of letting it ride, thinking that was going to be a surplus at some point because they weren't going to get hired. I really applaud the way you've done this year. In my 25 years of municipal auditing, this is the way it should be done, is looking at the budget realistically and not padding numbers just to pad them. So my hat's off to you and your hard work on this. I've appreciated working with you when we work together, and I still appreciate the time and effort it takes. Over the years, I've known a lot of financial people, bookkeeping people, and you're the second best, next to my wife. So thank you, and it's pretty enlightening when you actually sit down and look how we budgeted in the past. And this new way of budgeting, I really approve of. It really opens the eyes up, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else care to address Sean's remarks and what has been read into the record?
I'd just like to thank you for your work on this budgeting message. It's more thorough, comprehensive than any budgeting message I've read previously, so thank you.
You know, I appreciate the detail in it. I've been on the budget committee for 4 years, and for 4 years we have heard, hey, this is a problem, this is coming at us, and I don't think we have understood exactly what that meant. And so again, the detail and just the additional projection work, I think is exceptionally helpful.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you, Sean. That's on the record, and I believe we can, copies can be made available to anyone who cares to read it. Okay, so let's move down the agenda now. Next is the compensation board update, and this won't take too long, but I'm gonna put our findings on the record and report out from what we did this morning. As I said earlier, the three of us appointed by the commission met this morning for about an hour, and we had the HR director of the county there, as well as some staff. And what our charge has been over the years is to set salaries for elected officials only, not the represented employees, not the line employees, not the managers, simply those who are elected. And I'll tell you who the elected people are in Tillamook County. We have 3 commissioners, we have an assessor, we have a treasurer, we have a county clerk, a sheriff, and a justice of the peace, who serves as our local court official and also a judge in small claims court and traffic court. We also have a stipend that goes to the district attorney. The district attorney is technically an employee of the state of Oregon. And in this case, a lady who was recently elected as our district attorney receives a stipend from Tillamook County, and I believe it's in the range of about $17,500. The remainder of her salary, and I'm not sure what it is brought forward and paid by the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon has 3 levels of district attorneys, if my memory is correct, basically small, medium, and large, and I believe Tillamook County is small. Multnomah County would be large, and some of the medium would be in the middle, and I don't know what the differential is, but for purposes of our budget discussion, approximately 17,000 of that is funded by Tillamook County. This committee, the compensation committee, would not deal with the salary there. So we looked at the others, and what we get every time we've done this, and we've done this now a couple of times a year, is we get a rather large spreadsheet prepared by our own HR department, and it compares other counties of similar size, and I'll tell you which ones they are. It's Baker County, Curry, Cook, Jefferson, Hood River, Union, Wasco, Malheur, Clatsop, Lincoln, Polk, and Jackson County. Now, Jackson County, which is Southern Oregon, Medford area, that's quite a bit larger. So we looked at the counties that were selected, and this was done by staff, not by the committee. They're selected based on a comparable form of government, and some of these, as I mentioned early on, are home rule, where they employ a full-time administrator, usually is someone paid in the range of $150,000 to almost $200,000. In our case, we have 3 county administrators and 3 policy people who do the same thing. So we look at all those comparables and try to say, are we high, low, in the middle, or are the difficulties, would it preclude people from running for office or staying in office? Would we get the sort of people being offered up for election? But some of the things we talked about is the counties that we compare, the comparables, what might be available in the private sector, and that really doesn't apply. For example, a sheriff is a sheriff in counties only in America. There are no sheriffs in cities, there are no sheriffs, private sheriffs, period. However, Sean's position, for example, as a finance director, or in this case, a treasurer/finance director, she or people with her skills and ability and education could get a job almost anywhere because they do numbers. And every organization of any size employs a finance director of some sort. We also look a bit at the benefits, which are fairly generous in the public sector, as you know. And then we look at some other considerations and saying, are we out of line, or should we make some recommendations? And I will tell you, as of the moment, Tillamook County is about in the middle. We're really not out of line, except for possibly some positions, one being the county treasurer, I think, is perhaps, according to the data, a bit lower than others with comparable responsibilities. The others are pretty much in line, including the commissioners, but keep in mind, it's really not an apples-to-apples comparison, because what is done in Baker County is most assuredly done differently, something different than done here in Cook County and so on. So it's very hard to say that this person does exactly what others do. These people do policy, and they also do administrative duties. So having said all that, here's our recommendation. Well, there's one thing other, and we may talk about this in a few minutes. The county has undertaken an equity study, a pay and equity study across the county. Everybody who gets a paycheck, whether you're an elected official or an appointed person, is looked at relative to the market, relative to some history, and even the geographic area in which we live. That study won't be done until the end of the year. And if experience is any guide, it'll probably take 2 months longer. And things will take a little longer. It's a recommendation of our committee that there be no salary adjustments to any elected officials until such time as that study is presented to the commission and analyzed and accepted for what it is. Then we can reconvene this committee and see if any adjustments would be warranted. So we're talking after the first of the calendar year for sure. Now, there's one other part to this, and that is the cost of living. And if there is at least one labor contract, I believe, in negotiation, maybe two, but one, and I believe that will continue on for some months. So if there is some decision made to afford a cost of living increases to employees of Tillamook County, it is the recommendation of this committee that it be applied to everybody, including elected officials. So let's pick a number. Let's say there's a 3% cost of living adjustment that is agreed upon as necessary and should be put in place. Then it's a recommendation of this committee, and that's all it is a recommendation, that it apply to everybody, including the elected officials. So that may or may not happen, but if it happens to Tillamook County, it should happen to everybody within the county. That's our recommendation. So we'll put that on record, and we can talk about that in as much detail as you want when we get down to some open discussion on everything. So, any questions on that? Let me ask Bill, who was part of this, Mr. Bartline and Mr. Scott, did I? Yeah, I think you did. Did I say you covered the waterfront on that one?
Yeah, it was perfect.
Okay, perfect. Boy, that's a compliment from Bill. Okay, thank you. All right, then, so now let's go to our county departments and other funded agency. In other words, anybody who's going to get money from the county for anything, now would be the time to hear from those officials, elected or appointed. And I'd like to start with the special funds, since typically, as I said earlier, there's not nearly as many issues there because there's relatively little discretion. So I'm going to ask if there's anybody representing any of the 40-some special funds, the parks or the health department or any of them, county fair. If you'd like to address the full committee, now would be the time to come up and identify it and have a conversation. Going once, going twice.
Our library director is in the back of the room, but I don't know if he meant to address the committee.
Would you care to come up?
Sure.
Sorry.
That's it. If you call me out, I guess also.
You don't have to. Make sure your microphone is on, please. And identify yourself for the record. You're relatively new. I'm not sure a lot of these folks know who you are.
Hello, everyone. It is working.
Yes.
I'm the Don Allgaier. I'm the library director for Tillamook County Library, and I've presented to the budget committee on the library's budget for this year. I don't know that I have anything additional to add. I would just say that the budget looks good for the library. We have been well taken care of by the voters with the levy that was passed. The real challenge, like for every agency, is looking at inflation over time and what's happening there. Everyone's feeling that rise in costs. But other than that, I don't have anything additional to add.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else who represents one of our special funds? I don't see people here from parks or any other special funds, so going once, going twice. And as you may have noted as we went through the county treasurer's remarks, all the general funds are in balance except for the TLT fund, transient lodging tax. And that's something that we'll ask Rachel to explain when we get just a little further into the agenda. So other than that, all those funds are in balance, and it appears all the administrators and directors of those departments are satisfied. So I'm going to say our general funds, special funds are probably good to go, and we'll take it forward from there. All right, let's go to the general fund. Now, anybody who wants to address who represents one of the general funds. And again, the general funds are those funds including the sheriff, including the county clerk, and others that perform general government functions and are funded by somewhat discretionary revenues and over which this committee and ultimately the county commission has a fair amount of discretion. So the sheriff stood up. So sheriff, come on up and offer whatever you have to say today. Thank you.
Mic on when it's red or mic on when it's green?
Green.
All right.
And please put your name on the record.
All right. My name's Josh Brown. I am the elected sheriff. So, well, good afternoon, everybody. Been kind of a hectic few weeks. Not a couple of weeks that I was expecting. Quite honestly, I felt very confident about our budget. It was conservative, it was responsible. There was really no conversations about eliminating positions. So I honestly felt a little blindsided by the proposed budget when it was cutting that many positions. It wasn't just a few, it was more than 6. Everything I've done from that point forward has been as a reaction to that, trying to protect the office that I was elected to run. So this may be my last opportunity to talk. I'm going to try to go through it quickly. I don't want to miss anything, but I have a lot of important information that I want to get on the record. And what I want to do first is I want to address the notion that we're doing just fine with the staffing levels that we've had. That's been said a couple of different times. I've mentioned this before, that the sheriff's office is on track to spend or to incur 9,000 overtime hours in fiscal year 22-23. We also use part-time employees to cover hundreds of hours that need covered. Those hours are needing to cover. Our proactive policing has decreased in some places 30 to 40%. And we risk the quality of work from burnt out staff that is covering those 9,000 overtime hours. We're not doing just fine. We're barely hanging on. Commissioner Scar, in a recent interview, you actually acknowledged that we have inadequate staffing levels.
Totally agree.
So these 9,000 overtime hours represent far more than just a financial impact. They represent hours of time that our staff is away from their family and away from their work and away from the workload where they can relieve stress and stay healthy. No reasonable person can look at the number of overtime hours, the number of hours that our part-time help put in, the decrease in proactive policing, and believe that that is a legitimate business model. I also want to point out that it's been said that we're operating with these, or we have not been operating with these positions for 8 years, and I realize the paperwork shows that. But please remember, I've only been in this office for 2 years. 2.5 or just shy of 2.5 years. It's hard to say that I'm solely accountable for those positions not being filled. In fact, in the 2 years that I've been in here, we've made significant changes to the efficiency of our hiring process, and recently we had a very successful hiring event which yielded 11, 12 qualified candidates that moved on, a number we haven't seen in years. We lost the screen.
Is it? Did we just lose it in the room?
I just want to make sure the other two
Yeah, why
are.
don't you pause for a second?
We lost it in the meeting this morning for a little time and it was reset, so can you do something in the back of the room or what do we do?
The bell's working.
David, Bill, can you hear me? This is Rachel.
Yeah. Oh. You already in the meeting.
Flip inside me, yeah. Oh, we're back.
Okay, can everybody hear us and can we hear you? Can you, Commissioner Yamamoto, can you hear us?
Yeah. Was it just the meeting died or did
We're
the computer
muted still.
freeze?
Isabel, we're muted at the
Oh,
top
can you?
in the room.
There you go.
Commissioner, can you hear us now?
There you go, you just came back, thank you.
All right, sounds like, okay, the sheriff is speaking, so I think we're good. Sheriff, please continue.
Okay. So, excuse me, where I left off is earlier in the year we had the hiring event that yielded 11 to 12 qualified candidates, which is the best number that we've seen in years. In years, and this is despite COVID, this is despite the national shortage for law enforcement sentiment, etc. That is tremendous momentum. I also want to point out that holding me accountable solely for those 8 years where those positions were not filled, not appropriate in my opinion, but if I am to be held accountable for it, I think that accountability needs to be shared. The sheriff's office, the pay for the sheriff's office deputies is the lowest, or one of the lowest in the Pacific Northwest corner of Oregon. And it is absolutely the lowest in our own county. Yet we carry 2 to 4 times the workload of any other agency in our very own county. It's very, very difficult to recruit when I'm being hindered with something as important as compensation. I also want to note that the deductions from the sheriff's office that the sheriff's office is incurring represent about 13%, 12 to 13% of the overall general fund budget for the sheriff's office, while most other departments are facing anywhere from 1 to 5%. And the document that was actually shared on the screen is one that Under Sheriff Kelly had. I have a copy of it, but it was on the PowerPoint, and that's where I used that's how I referenced that. Additionally, when you look at those total deductions, the sheriff's office is actually incurring about 60% of that total $1.5 million that is being deducted from things. All other departments combined is incurring 40%. It's been said that all departments were looked at equally and treated equally throughout this process, but it's clear by those numbers that that's not true. We're carrying the heaviest burden. The sheriff's office is also the only department being asked to demonstrate that we can fill a position, and even then there's a chance it's not approved. Again, Commissioner Scar, you said as much in the interview that you recently had. Historically, in Tillamook County, when a position is cut, it doesn't return, and there's other department heads that can attest to that, I'm certain. I also understand that there's a narrative that those positions are not in fact being cut. They are in unfilled positions. But when you look at the proposed budget, that document is the document that gets approved and adopted. And that's the document that guides the county's financial budget for the fiscal year. Those documents show 6.25 less positions than the year before and what was requested. By my definition, that's cut, especially when narratives, things of that nature, those aren't part of the approved budget. Again, I define those as cutting positions. As mentioned, it's been proposed the sheriff's office will be required to come before the board and demonstrate that we can hire a candidate. This new model of one department having to come forward and prove that somebody can be hired is an unprecedented change and has no protocols or procedures written for it. Does this demonstration that we can hire a person begin at the requisition process, where we fill out the form, or does it come when we have a candidate ready to go and we spent money on them? As we've already established, it's not guaranteed that we're going to get that position. Creating this new process that has no established guidelines and removes the lay citizen board members from the process is not an appropriate way to move forward. Additionally, there's no historical precedent where elected county commission has the ability to control or dictate another elected official operates his or her office, especially as it pertains to staffing. This is unheard of and frankly inappropriate. When you look at all the facts that I just laid out, the sheriff's office is making the majority of the cuts. And we're the only department being asked to follow a strange new protocol. This is all despite the board adopted priority list that was given out during a PowerPoint presentation. I have multiple copies if the lay citizens haven't seen it. It shows that public safety is the #1 priority. And it says that it's from a board-adopted budget priority list. Despite that list, we are still being hit the hardest. I also want to know why, if public safety is the #1 priority, why is the county in the process of putting significant monies towards the special projects like the annex? Why is the county looking at buying property for $750,000? Those fall within priority #4. Realistically, all this information that I just went over with you is actually a moot point because there is a viable solution. Thanks to my Commissioner Liaison, Commissioner Bell, who checked into this, it is possible to do. The county's plan to help relieve projected shortfall from timber revenue had 2 key phases as explained to me. The first one was that having all departments present a conservative budget for consideration by the Budget Committee. The second part was to put a set dollar amount into the Revenue Stabilization Fund that was equal to the average amount received by timber revenue over the last 15 years. I believe the budget summary actually spoke about that. That amount is $4.5 million. That amount is to be placed in there, and it's meant to help smooth the curve when timber revenue moves up or down year to year. Right now, that money is in the revenue stabilization, and all departments presented a conservative budget. So as explained to me, that seems to me like that accomplished what the Budget Committee explained is how we actually help solve this issue. So, now like I said, that $4.5 million is in there. The way that the money got to equal that $4.5 million is making the cuts that have been suggested on the PowerPoint as well as the document that I have. But we did find the additional $1.8 million, and as I mentioned, it's out of the project like the annex. That money has originated from general fund money. It was in the non-departmental over the last handful of years, and small chunks have been transferred over, $250,000 to $483,000 over the years. And it's been transferred over to the building improvements, which is I believe a special revenue. From the special revenue, it was scheduled in fiscal year 22-23, which is the one that we're in right now, to be moved over to the court annex. That money, if it's gone over already, or if it's planning on going over at the end of this fiscal year, if we simply just move that back to general fund money and put that in contingency, then the cuts don't have to happen. Departments' budgets can be put back intact, and there's even money left over to be able to start the court annex project. And like I said, all of those cuts, or at least a significantly less amount of those cuts, can be eliminated. Sheriff's Office could leave all of our positions intact. We could continue to move forward with hiring process, maintain the momentum that we had. We could move forward with purchasing our critically needed patrol vehicles that I only asked for 2 rather than the 4 or 5 that I normally ask for, and quite frankly, the Sheriff's Office needs. And as I said, this leaves a small portion of money in the annex fund that could allow for the project to start. I did find some other discrepancies that I simply am hoping to bring to the attention and or work on maybe understanding why. And the reason I bring them up is because it can have a significant impact into the Sheriff's Office budget. The first one, and I did actually ask this question, but as of today I haven't received an answer. The first one is interest on special revenue accounts. Most special revenue funds are gaining interest, and there's an actual revenue line item for interest on most special interest. All 4 of the sheriff's office special revenue accounts that we have, or funds, are not receiving interest. I don't know why. 2 of them stopped receiving interest in the 21-22 budget year. The other 2 don't have a line item for it. And I believe that there is some work being done on that, but again, having that interest added to our special revenue accounts can help. The second discrepancy actually pertains to the short-term rental ordinance, which is number 86. In that ordinance, it states 2 special revenue funds will be created for allocation of licensing fee revenue associated with short-term revenue or short-term rentals. The first is for workforce housing, which is supposed to receive 75% of those funds, and the other is public safety, which is supposed to receive 25% of those funds. There's already a special revenue created for workforce housing, but there is not one created for public safety. When you look at the workforce housing, it shows that there's a projected revenue of $750,000 for short-term license fees. There is an additional $350,000 listed as revenue for short-term rental permit fees in another section under the Department of Community Development budget. I'm not sure what the difference is between a permit fee and a license fee, but as near as I can tell, they're the same. The Sheriff's Office is supposed to be receiving 25% of that revenue. Therefore, if this special revenue fund was created, or maybe there's a reason for it, or maybe, I don't know. I'm hoping that an answer can be found. But when you look at how much money that 25% represents over the years since this ordinance has been in place, that's a significant amount of money that could be or should be going towards the Sheriff's Office. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out. I want to say that it's very important to note that the Sheriff's Office did their part in presenting a very conservative and responsible budget. We've talked a lot about not growing. I did not request any additional positions. I did not include any special projects, and I only asked for the 2 vehicles. I did not ask for the typical 4 to 5. Like I said, we desperately need that many. The counties have put the funds into the Revenue Stabilization Fund per the plan that was explained to me. There's a very viable option to not make those cuts or not make the cuts that are being proposed. And the way I see it, simply by choosing staff over the annex. Also, if the plan to smooth the ups and downs of timber revenue it was to utilize the funds placed in the Revenue Stabilization Fund, I don't see a reason not to believe that the budget is not okay right now. So I am asking this budget committee, and my hope is, based on some of the comments that I heard in the very beginning of this, that minds are not already made up, and that everybody actually looks at this and considers it. And see that this is a viable option, send a message to the community that public safety is a priority, just like the adopted priority list that you've put forth. This allows the Sheriff's Office to continue the upward momentum, and it helps keep morale in our Sheriff's Office high because they know we can continue. Thank you.
Yes, I would like one, please. So let me ask the committee then, would you like to discuss what the sheriff has brought to our attention? Or would you like to hear from other general fund departments and then take it up on the schedule when we have the deliberations, which would be after the public? What is your pleasure?
I can answer a couple of sheriff's questions, if that will help.
Why don't you do that, speak to that, and then I'll ask that question again. If you want to take this up in earnest, or wait till we get just a little further into the process.
Okay, so Sheriff, I'm happy to answer the questions on the short-term rental. So a short-term rental license is different than the short-term rental operator license fee, or the short-term permit is different than the short-term rental operator license fee. Short-term permits go specifically to community development to support their work in issuing those permits. So that's a totally separate fund. For the short-term rental operator license fee, which is a 75-25 split, that 25% was actually originally intended for the fire departments and others who receive special revenue, who receive tax money, and when a tax abatement is approved, so we have a property that's getting ready to, that is applied for and getting ready to use property tax abatement. So special districts that will lose money specifically through that property tax abatement, that's what the 25% was set up for, was to keep special districts whole. So I understand the label on it is probably confusing, but that was its original intent. So I can answer those two questions and hope that helps.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Bill.
Yes, please go ahead.
So historically, back when the first 6 years, 5-6 years I was a commissioner, all department heads had to come in and ask approval before they hired somebody. This is not new. This was historically done in the commission. So this is not a new thing. It's we quit doing it when the funding got stabilized and we didn't need to do that anymore. But that is false. That never happened. We always had the department heads come in and lobby for the position.
How long
and I feel sorry for Marlene. She had to do a lot of lobbying.
How long ago?
to get word
I'd
out.
like to clarify my statement on that.
Come on up, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner, the sheriff wants to speak to that, so we'll get everybody on the microphone here. Go ahead.
You are correct, Bill. We did have to come before the board to be able to hire somebody. We didn't have to come before the board, and we never had to ask for funding to hire somebody. There is a difference. And when I say that it's never been done before, what I mean is coming before the board, asking permission to even have funding to hire somebody. That's what my clarification is.
Amen. Amen.
Hey, Sheriff, why don't you stay right there if you don't mind for a minute?
Will do.
Give you some steps.
Yes,
Can I clarify a
yes,
few
please,
things?
Treasurer, go ahead.
You stated 6.25. It's actually, there was a 2.5 reduction in your accounting tech, moving her wages to community corrections 142.
I thought that was in the requested budget that we put forward.
Move her over there.
Yeah, wasn't that not in our requested budget?
Yes, that's why you're
But on the
down.
proposed, it's 3.25 positions less from the requested budget, when we already moved the 0.25 over in the requested budget.
I'll double check. We have a goal to reach 4.5 million in the revenue stabilization. We're currently only at 3.2.
But that includes the $1.3 million deposit this year,
If
or
we-
in
if we-
23-24.
If we do the transfer this year, yes.
Yes.
And I did not receive the request for vehicles, for the vehicle reserve fund from the sheriff's office.
You're gonna have to clarify what that means, because I don't know what that means.
Usually when you send in your budgets, I receive copies of the orders, write-ups that Ford does. So those were never included.
Have we done those in the past?
All right, other questions, as long as the sheriff is here. So, Mr. Scott would like to continue on our conversation. How about the others? Do you want to hear from any other general fund department? They're not in. And then move through the agenda and hear from the public, and then go into some depth on what we need to do. Is that, yes, Commissioner?
I'd like to respond to something the sheriff said that was my idea, and talk about that for a minute. The idea was, as it was proposed to the sheriff in this budget, to take positions out of his budget, put them into contingency, and then he would need to come and talk to us about whether or not he could add positions back in order to hire for them. We discovered that in fact you're right, that you can't you can't recruit for positions that are not in your budget. So
Correct.
you wouldn't. So if we went forward with that plan, you would have to come before us and ask for those positions to be reinstated into your budget.
Correct.
And then thereafter, do the recruiting.
Correct.
So what Bill was talking about, the idea of all directors coming to the Board of Commissioners and talking about positions they want to fill. We did used to do that, then we stopped because we had some years where we had more timber revenue, and we, maybe frankly, we're spending a lot of our meeting time going through Marlene's positions because she had so much turnover, And so I think we just stopped doing that, but I think we could start doing that again. And the level of budget scrutiny that we need to have right now, for the reasons Sean and Deborah were talking about, I think it's reasonable for everybody to do that, to come and talk about, we need to rehire this position, here's why it's important. I think everybody could do that. So I totally agree with you that you shouldn't be singled out. But that's different than taking the positions out of your budget and putting them in contingency. Those are two different things. And so what you were talking about, my suggestion earlier, was that if we needed, in order to balance the budget, if we needed to take general fund money out of the budget currently, put it into contingency in order to balance it, the promise I've heard everyone make to you is that money will be there in contingency when you need it for you to hire those people as you're able. Based on that promise, my solution was, could we not take general fund money out of the building improvement fund, which it was general fund money, it went into the building improvement fund. That came from land sales a long time ago. I don't remember which year exactly, but the last time we were talking about building a new courthouse facility. So it came from land sales, but it also came from fat timber years when it was responsible budgeting. In years when we had extra money, it went into that fund. And it makes sense because we're responsible for all kinds of buildings, including this one, and the sheriff's office. So we're responsible for all kinds of buildings that will need improvements and repairs. So all of that makes sense. But it's true that money came from the general fund. Now it's in building improvement, which is a special fund. So I went and talked to Sean last week or the week before and asked, could we not move that money, that's the 1.8 million, I think, in the building improvement fund into contingency with the same promise that we're making to you, that we're offering to you, the same promise that money's going to be in contingency in order to balance our budget, and it'll be there when we need it for the building projects ahead. I'm not saying move it in there and spend it any more than anybody was saying move your position money into contingency and spend it. So I'm saying exactly the same thing we've been saying to you. That money would go into contingency and be held there for when we need it. If we move forward with an annex project, which we may or may not, but if we did, we're not going to be able to complete the project like that in a year. We haven't even started it yet. So it would be there for whatever we needed it for. And that would enable us to leave your positions in your budget. And if I think that really this is about a philosophy. Like, what is the philosophy if we're headed toward a financial cliff, which maybe we are, and hopefully we're not, but maybe we are. There's the real risk, maybe 50-50, that we're headed toward a financial cliff, and it's going to be terrible. Maybe timber revenues will come in better, and we're not, but we don't know. So it makes perfect sense to be careful and be conservative. So if we're headed toward a financial cliff, what is our philosophy? I think we're lacking that because this timber shortfall caught us by surprise. And so we're lacking a cohesive philosophy about how do we want to address that? What does that mean? To me, it doesn't mean we should lop off positions from the sheriff's office because you're the biggest budget in the general fund. I think we would have to take a long, hard look at what are our priorities. And we have the priorities of mandated services, which yours are. And we should be looking at what are we doing that's mandated, what are we doing that's not mandated. It's kind of like, it reminds me of the conversation about roads and local access roads. We used to pave local access roads because we had the funding to do it. It was timber revenue from federal forests. When that dried up, we stopped paving local access roads. So what are we doing that's like that? That's not a mandated service, that's important and we all care about it and we want to do it, but we wouldn't actually have to do it. So I'm saying we lack that philosophy right now. I think we should fund your positions this year and we should figure all that out in the next year. Before we're in the meeting next year, we should figure out what is our philosophy moving forward and how are we going to address it if we're really headed for a financial cliff. Now, I want to ask you about Rockaway Beach, because if we were to take positions out of your budget, I've heard from folks in Rockaway Beach that they're upset about this because they're paying for positions in Rockaway Beach that they're not getting because we've been promising them that we'll recruit those as soon as possible, and then we'll put those deputies on the road. So they're upset about that. So they're upset that we're even talking about reducing the number of positions in your budget. And also I'd like to know if you can provide us with any information on how this discussion is impacting the recruitment, because you're absolutely right that therefore, as long as I've been in office, the sheriff's office has had a hard time recruiting people through COVID, through the George Floyd's death, through the anti-police sentiment, through the, you know, everything that's happened in the last 4 years that we're all aware of. So we've had a very hard time recruiting, and now we're coming out of that. And so you had 11 people respond to that recruitment effort. You know, thanks to you and thanks to HR. You did an outstanding job together. So now suddenly the HR director told me that we've just made 2 offers to people for your department, and we have 5 more people in the process, 5 more people in background and psych evals. So how is this discussion impacting those people? Because I'm worried that those people who we hope to hire are listening to these conversations, and they'll be like, oh God, you know, that's not stable.
So, I'll say I will wait. I had to write those all down. That was a lot of questions.
Sorry.
That's all right.
David, you just stay up there.
While we have a break, Doug, let me tell you, I have another meeting at 7.
7? So what's the problem then?
It's only 4:30.
So you'll be late. Well, we'll talk, in fact.
I've got somebody up there, heading up there right now to fix that.
Thank you.
What did you do, crash?
Yeah.
Keep saying it's a glitch.
We should get back on shortly, and I don't want to continue until we are, to make sure everybody's in the loop here. I don't want to have to repeat things, and it's only fair if somebody's taking the time out of his or her day to do this, we should get the full measure. So I will ask a general question. It's quite likely we could run past 5 because these good folks may have something to add, and then we need to deliberate it. So we can.
The individual mics also shut off.
If we're gonna have meetings like this with lots of people in the room, we're gonna have to try to do something.
We can hear you guys.
We're gonna have to what?
We can hear you now,
You can't
Commissioner.
hear us yet.
So,
Maybe hit this.
mic blocked off there on top.
Up here.
Open it up.
What happened?
So would you, if we went until 6 and maybe take 5 or 10 somewhere along the way, would that be acceptable to all of us? Or, you know, Rachel, would you be on overtime and have to get paid more, or what?
As she should.
Rachel works about 70 hours a week, I think.
I can't.
Well, we'll just keep in mind, we don't have on a public schedule, but I want to give these folks an opportunity to say something. It's just not fair to have them come up here on half a day or whatever and not be heard.
No, it's, if we take a break for a few minutes, there's some things I can try that might make it more stable.
At another time, we would have their voices heard and we would all get to hear from them before that happens.
Is it not coming back? No. Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so this is at 5 to 10.
Yeah, so, all right, it appears we've got a technical issue. Let's be back here and queued up, ready to go at 4:30. That's 6 minutes, give or take.
4:30, I got 7 minutes, okay.
No, you go.
No, I'm fine. I'll wait for you.